Well, Marxist criticism is the actual use of Marxist theory in understanding literature. The critics who use this theory are called Marxist critics, and the criticism which uses Marxism is called Marxist criticism. Now, according to Marxists or Marxist critics, and to other scholars, in fact, actually, literature reflects, even many other scholars believe the same, literature the reflection of social society or social life. Literature reflects those social institutions out of which it emerges and is itself a social institution. Literature itself is a social institution. Although it reflects those social institutions out of which it emerges, it itself becomes a social institution with a particular ideological function. Because literature also comes up with certain ideological function, and it itself becomes a social institution. A social institution means a society, a social organization. It can be a religion, it can be culture, whatever other forms of social behavior are reflected through. Literature is a part of culture only, you might be knowing that. But literature itself becomes a kind of social institution. Literature reflects class struggle and materialism. Now, in many of the works of literature, you come across the quest for wealth. And this quest for wealth traditionally defines characters. If you watch Hindi movies, if you read novels, you will come across the characters in search of wealth. It talks about the literature talks about the class struggle, material development. So Marxists view literature not as works created in accordance with timeless artistic criteria. Actually, others think that literature or literary works are timeless. They are timeless artistic, uh, arts, artistic forms, I can say. But Marxists don't think in that way. They look at literature as products of the economic and ideological determinants, which are specific to that era. Okay, so literature for Marxist critics are the products of the economic and ideological determinants. These products are controlled by economic factors and ideological factors of that given era. If you go back to William Shakespeare's plays, if you go back to the literature of 18th century, 19th century, the modern literature, you will find that economic and ideological determinants are always present. So literature reflects an author's own class. So we talk about Dalit literature, we talk about literature of the working class, we talk about the literature of the upper class. So literature reflects an author's own class or analysis of class relations. They may be piercing or shallow. Piercing means deeper level, in-depth analysis, or the shallow analysis. But literature reflects an author's own class. Okay. Now, what is the role of the Marxist critic then? When once we think that literature is a reflection of the social class or it itself is a social institution, we need to understand the role of the Marxist critic. So the Marxist critic simply is a careful reader, a viewer, who keeps in mind issues of power and money and any of the following kind of questions in his mind. Now, these are some questions that a Marxist critic always keeps in his mind as a reader or as a viewer. The first question: What role does class play in the work? What is the author's analysis of class relations? Second, how do characters overcome oppression? Third, in what ways does the work serve as propaganda for the status quo, or does it try to undermine it? Fourthly, what does the work say about oppression? Or are social conflicts ignored or blamed elsewhere? And fifthly, does the work propose some form of utopian vision as a solution to the problems encountered in the work? So, while reading a work, a piece of literature, from the Marxist point of view, one has to keep these questions in the mind and view or read that literature. Okay, we shall talk about these questions in a detailed manner in the next lecture. Further, we shall talk about Marxist literary theory in brief, ideology, and some other factors are there. We shall be talking about these things in the next lecture.